Hello and welcome to Cinema Spectator, a show where an expert and a casual movie fan watch movies in the cinematic canon. Today we are watching, this is the start of February, French February, so we're watching a movie called Playtime, directed by Jacques Tati and starring Jacques Tati and Barbara Denick. My name is Cameron Tuttle and I'm joined with Isaac Ransom. Isaac, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm feeling awfully casual just because of my attire, but also because I don't know anything about French cinema. Who does? So I watched it. I watched this movie. That is what I have to say. I am doing well overall. Busy week, as always. When is it not busy? Mm-hmm. I will not burden you with any more information. How about you, man? How are you doing?
Doing good. I just got back. I was on a pretty long drive this afternoon, but I just got back from spending time with my girlfriend in Pismo. It was fun. We just relaxed and had a good time, hung out. It was a little rainy, but overall, just a good trip in general. With that being said, I didn't really watch that much this week. I did. We've been going through Broadchurch, which is kind of a British crime drama show. So we finished that, and then she had actually started watching House of Cards. So we continued. We picked up where she had left off there. But other than that, that's pretty much all I've watched. I don't think I've watched anything else. So.
Well, this week for me, what have I watched this past week? I'm on a quest to attempt to watch Harry Potter, just because I haven't seen any of it. So I watched the first one with my sister at her new house. They're doing this remodel thing. They have a 82-inch 8K TV now, which is just insane.
Wow. Dang.
So yeah, probably overkill for that film, but we watched that. I started watching this show called Psych that I used to watch all the time when I was younger. Yeah. And it's wow, I finally understand the references, when in the past I just laughed and pretended to actually understand them. A lot of good movie references. I watched this episode where it was basically a whole Shining, or not The Shining, The Exorcist tribute. The entire episode was basically just making fun of that. And I was yeah, I literally had no idea that's what they were talking about watching this. Besides, there was heavy references for it.
And now you understand it because I forced you to watch that movie. Wow.
Well, sure, yeah. But the show has just a goofy charm. Also, Juliana's been watching this weird. It's just a very uncomfortable humor for me. It's called Schitt's Creek. Do you know what that show is?
Yeah, I've watched it.
I enjoy it, but there's something about this snarky, sarcastic Twitter humor that's underlying through the entire thing, and it's not laugh out loud funny. It feels like you're have a double chin and you're just kind of at every joke. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. There's a couple moments where it's pretty funny. I would say overall it's not it never got me to Arrested Development levels of hilarity, but I enjoyed it. I think it's a good show. It's got some good moments, and but yeah, I do know what you mean in that way. But
I could have swore to you that I watched another movie front to back, but it's completely not coming to my head. I watched the first half of What We Do in the Shadows, which I think is hilarious. It's a great mockumentary. I love mockumentary style films, especially when they're funny. That helps a lot when they're actually funny. What We Do in the Shadows is just excellent. Every time I watch it, I think it gets even funnier and funnier. And there's just so many stupid jokes in there. I was just kind of blown away by how fun the sort of the world that they've built in that movie, because it's about vampires living in New Zealand, but they sort of they have towards the beginning half of the film a run-in with a group of werewolf bros, and they just start yelling at each other. It's so funny. It's so fun. And they have this dry moment where there's this one guy who's a human and doesn't know that they're vampires or werewolves, and they just cut to his confused face after their confrontation. I'm man, people got to watch this movie. It's fun. Like it's really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then of course the film that we are going to talk about today. But if you haven't watched anything else, Cameron, we could just kind of get into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm going to shill for us for a second, but if you've listened to our show before, you know this is the part where I tell you to check us out at patreon.com/ECFS Productions. Give us a few dollars, get exclusive benefits as always, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. As a matter of fact, even if you're a patron, I just want you to give us a rating on iTunes. That is what I want you to do. I cannot stress it enough. Giving a rating on iTunes, whether you're free, whether you're a Patreon supporter, it seriously helps us out. If you haven't given us a rating, go there, give us 5 stars. Grab your grandma's iPhone, make her give us 5 stars. Grab your mom's iPhone, make her give us 5 stars. Like seriously, it widens our audience and helps the show grow in the algorithm. We're trying to beat the algorithm or whatever. So we think that we have something special with this podcast, and we hope you feel the same way. Of course, we're always open to feedback, but please give us 5 stars. Give us a rating there. I know it's a little cringy that I'm hitting it over and over, but that is a major help. We love our Patreons. Thank you for supporting us all out there. If you're interested in that, if you enjoy the show, again, patreon.com/ECFS Productions, and get some cool benefits like commentary tracks, getting your question read on air, being part of that community. Cameron, why on earth are you making me watch French movies?
Yeah, well, I actually have one more announcement, sort of shilling, I guess. This February, this month, we're going to try and roll out a video version of our podcast, and we're going to put that on YouTube. It's going to be at ECFS Productions. It's just going to be our Zoom call, so you're going to get to see us in our bedrooms or wherever we record. But we thought it would be nice to have another option. I know a lot of people do like to listen to podcasts on YouTube. I do sometimes when I'm doing something else on my computer. But yeah, so that'll be at ECFS Productions on YouTube. We're going to start rolling that out this month, so please subscribe over there as well. So French movies, your favorite, Isaac. It's really the world that you love to dwell in, right?
I think honestly, like, I give the French a bunch of crap, but most of it is sort of like an uneducated humor that I come at it with. Like, I don't know much about French culture and French cinema besides like the snooty side.
Yeah.
Which is just, I guess kind of obvious and well made fun of. So I'm pretty reluctant to go into this month. Although after January, I'll take what I can get, I guess, is sort of where I'm standing with it. But
yeah, so yeah, well, one of the reasons that I wanted to introduce this month to you, I'm not going through sort of the French canon necessarily, although I think we'll touch on some of those movies. Really, what I'm trying to do is introduce you to some movies that I think you'll actually enjoy. Introduce you to certain foreign films, specifically French films this month that you might open your eyes a little bit to a different taste, a different flavor of cinema. And one of the reasons why I like to do that is, well, for me, I've had those experiences in class throughout my time, educating myself on these movies. I've had those times where I don't really understand. Maybe it's a certain director or maybe it's a certain type of film. For me, I think the specific one that happened was the director Yasujiro Ozu, who has a very tight, specific style of filmmaking. And at first, I took a whole semester on just this one director. So I went into it not really understanding or not really caring much about his films. And over time, I grew to really enjoy them and really. They become sort of a flavor, a certain, maybe a paint on the paintbrush. It's a different example of how film is done in a way. And so for me, I want to kind of share you or share that experience with you in a smaller way. I'm not going to make you do a whole semester of French films, but I will have you do a month of French films that I think might shift you just a little bit, or make you appreciate or understand a little bit more that side of things. I'll go into, I guess, a very, very like brief, simplistic overview of French cinema. I don't even want to say that, because it's not. We're just going to touch on a little bit of the history, a little bit of some of the thought that came out of French cinema before we get directly into this movie, just as a primer for this month. But the French have kind of a reputation, like you said, for being a little bit snooty, or a little bit more heady in a way, philosophical, I guess you could say. And part of the reason for that was, there was a couple actual like film journals, so scholarly journals that ran in France after World War II. And the main one was the Cahiers du Cinéma, and that was contributed to by a lot of critics who would end up being directors, end up, really making a name for themselves in French cinema. But a lot of the reason why you think of French film, or French everything, I guess, but specifically French film, as snooty, is because it had an academic basis beforehand. In a way, it had this sort of groundwork before there was sort of the French New Wave that happened in the 60s. They laid a groundwork for saying, we reject basically American style movies. We reject Hollywood movies. We're going to go in a different path in the way that we direct these films. And so, Francois Truffaut was a big influencer in that. And this is a movie that is quite the opposite of that, I guess. Now it's not necessarily a blockbuster, it's not a Hollywood film in a sense. But I would say it really doesn't, it really stands apart in terms of its filmmaking. It is completely, in some ways, extremely over the top production wise, whereas lots of French films were very narrow. And think about Breathless. It was shot in the back of a mail cart on the streets of Paris, and these were very like guerrilla films, very small constructed productions. Whereas this film, it was shot on 70 millimeter film, so like this giant format. It was shot in a way, and it was shot in a way that they had to do a ton of production on the back end. It was a really, really expensive movie to make. And so in a lot of ways, Tati is kind of his own vein in French cinema that stands apart a little bit. And that's kind of why I wanted to introduce him first, is because I think he holds a little bit of the style of someone like Charlie Chaplin, someone like Mr. Bean, like he's got that essence that is not very French in the way that we think of it, but is actually classically French in the way that it might have been looked at the time. So I want to introduce Jacques Tati by saying he used to be a mime. Like before he was a director, he was in stage plays. He was a French mime. So think about that when assessing this movie or going into this movie, because you can really see that, and that's sort of, that's what I mean by like, he's traditionally French, yes, but he's also kind of set apart from the new French, the Francois Truffauts of the world, I guess. So I don't know. That's my spiel at the beginning of it. We can go into sort of the specifics and break it down. Honestly, like, we don't really need to spend a lot of time on the plot of the movie. I want to talk a lot about the production and sort of I think it's a very carefully constructed movie, and I want to get your thoughts on that. And I guess maybe beforehand, I'll just say a little bit briefly about Monsieur Hulot is a recurring character. So Tati's character, who you kind of follow throughout half the movie, is a recurring character in the same way that Charlie Chaplin's The Tramp is a recurring character. So he has, he was in Mon Uncle and a couple other films by Tati that this character is sort of carried over, and you're following the adventures and the life of this particular character. So, anyways, I would like to hear, I guess, your initial thoughts after that spiel. What do you think?
I think Playtime sort of took me by surprise because it wasn't what I thought a French movie would be like, if that makes sense. And I think you're totally right when you're saying that it has an essence of Chaplin, or it was instant. It was like instantly recognizable that it reminded me of watching movies with my Uncle Amir, because he was into like the Pink Panther or like Mr. Bean, those kind of movies, right? And so it was strange that it was familiar. I think that's what kind of like drew me in a little bit more. But I have to say that the beginning of the film stylistically is sterile and corporate, right? And it's abundantly clear with the way that they frame the camera, the way that they position everything around that, right? Is that it's showing this gray tone, setting, right? It's exploring that. And I was in a position of boredom, like, when watching that beginning, because I was like, I get it. I get it. It's sterile, it's boring. And for some reason, there's this like familiar goofball character wandering around this city, right? And so like, I don't know, like, honestly, I started sort of dozing off like when I was watching it. I never fell asleep, but I was like, wow, like I am really tired, like watching this movie, right? It didn't really begin to grab me until everything with the restaurant, which felt like it went on for so long, but it was somewhat more enjoyable than the rest of the beginning. And I think my least favorite part of Playtime is that whole section with the apartments. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm, there's like this apartment scene that really chugs, in my opinion. Like I was like, that was the moment where I was like, I just can't with this. Like this is so like it feels so much longer than it really needed to be, right? Mm-hmm. So with all that negativity up front, I was pleasantly surprised to see a super clever setup and delivery of a restaurant that's like not ready to open, house a ton of people. And it was, and the concept is as fun as it sounds. They have some really great gags that I think are worth the price of admission in it. And I think that's where I was like, okay, like this wasn't a huge waste of my time. I wasn't falling asleep during that moment. I was just I was intrigued by like what was even happening. I was like, wait, why? Like it really does feel like the movie changes suddenly.
It does. Yeah.
At the restaurant moment. And then the ending that kind of shows color in a gray or of what was a gray city, right? And so I sort of saw that like that spectrum shown, and I was like, okay, like there's a little bit of this artsy side. Very weird package. I'm not as negative as I was towards the beginning because of the restaurant stuff. And overall, I'd say like I liked it, but I don't know if I would like recommend it to a ton of people. I do think the movie's slow. Even if it does have like the goofball energy that's sort of like, a cup of chicken noodle soup, right? It's comforting. You're watching it. You don't really know why it's comforting, but it is. And that just wasn't enough to like hold my attention in some ways, because it was just like, how many times is this guy going to walk around a cubicle? How many times is this guy going to squeeze a black chair? It's funny, but I'm also like, I've seen it once, like I was just kind of like, all right, like I need some color. I need something happening here, because I don't even know why I'm following these people, right? I'm just watching it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a strange package. It's really, because you texted me ahead of time. You're like, Isaac, make sure that you go into this movie with like a little bit of understanding, a little bit of context for this. And I was kind of against that sentiment. I was like, I don't really want to give it a pass, like I just kind of want to see it for what it is. And I think it led to a little bit of a confusing like experience. It's like eating, I know I compare stuff to food a lot, but it's like eating something that has a flavor that you don't expect. You know what I mean? It's like having like bacon and ice cream. Like it's not necessarily supposed to go together but once you kind of get used to the flavor, you're like, okay, like I see what's going on there. You know what I mean? It might be jarring at first, but then it comes together. So yeah, that's kind of my initial impression. For those of you who haven't seen the film, I'll kind of summarize if I haven't done it enough, but it sort of follows like these tourists or travelers or people that live in the city or people that are visiting the city of Paris in somewhat of a modern, I don't know if it was supposed to be like futuristic.
It is, yeah. Yeah, it's supposed to be. So it's, I will preface this because it's kind of important to knowing like the direction of the film, I guess. It's supposed to be a bit of a satire on like modern Paris, essentially.
Yeah,
in the way that it's become very like corporate, very Americanized, very consumeristic, and is losing the things that people and French people specifically love about Paris. And one of the most amazing, I mean, it's not really a gag. It's kind of a somber note in the movie in some ways. But I find it just incredible is every time they open sort of the glass doors if they're going into a shop or whatever, when he's following the lady, she'll open the doors and there will be an amazing Parisian landmark reflected in the door, but she's missing that because she's just going into the same store that she could have gone to in America or whatever. So like to me, I could understand that the beginning is slow, definitely. In some ways it is, especially if you don't know what's going on. But also the movie is kind of detailed. Like the humor is very much in the little impressions, the small details, and he kind of circles back around to jokes that are maybe happened in some of the earlier parts. I do agree though that like the end sequence in the restaurant is just like absolutely like bananas. It goes completely off the rails, and it's hilarious too. Everything kind of just stacks up on top of each other. All of the gags that he lays out in the beginning, just it builds and builds and builds into this final like cacophony basically. And at that point he's layering in, like it's amazing. He has, at the beginning of the restaurant sequence, he does each gag one by one, right? So he has the waiter stepping over the glass tile or the tile in the dance floor. He has them pointing out that there's the freshly painted chairs are leaving marks. He has the guy, the people who are like salting and peppering the same fish over and over again. And so he does. Oh, and the guy who keeps ripping he keeps getting like all the ripped clothing.
Oh, that was my favorite. That was
which
my
is
favorite.
So funny. And so he has all these layers in terms of the jokes, and he sets them up all at once, and you don't really focus on any one character or anything. Like there's not it's not like you know anybody's name, like you wouldn't
Right.
know who these characters are, but they are, the loud American tourist, or the guy who keeps getting his pants and shirt ripped, and the two drunk guys, and like so there's these like single characteristics that you can follow, and then he just completely, like, by the end of it, he's layering like 5, 6, 7 jokes, 7 of these gags all on top of each other. And you're kind of like, you're amazed at how like everything is still holding together. You're still following what's happening, but also it's all like just total chaos, like it's kind of incredible how he's able to manage to like juggle all of those different gags. It's really, really kind of a feat of filmmaking in some ways. And that's just like the stage direction, and the art direction in that sequence. It's just like off the charts.
Everything in the restaurant, I think, is totally fun. There's a impatient part of me that almost would recommend just that scene on its own. And I don't know like how much you'd really miss out from it, like, because as soon as it introduces this restaurant out of nowhere, is suddenly you're understanding what's happening. Like there's just clarity in that moment, because you're like, it introduces the place, it introduces what the place is going through, how they're not ready for people. And there are these characters that you've seen that you don't really have a full understanding of like who they are. I like what you said about like not knowing anybody's name, but suddenly the bartender behind the bar, like dodging the wooden beams that were designed poorly. Like, I'm like, yeah, this is so much fun. And
the architect who's like sweating, profusely sweating, walking around, and the guy who keeps like running into the beams. Oh, the doorman! Oh, it's so funny.
The doorman's so good. Yeah, I think this movie has like an extremely positive message behind it, because it's sterile, boring, corporate, gray setting at the beginning is so. It's so lonely, I guess, to the traveling character, the one that you're watching the whole time with the socks. You know what I mean? The goofball character. And so much of the human element is removed, right? When all these things are cookie cutter, so much of like the life of Paris or whatever, or like of the old culture. And that message on its own, I think, can be a little bit like, maybe it's not a bad message, but it's just a nostalgic trip that maybe for younger people, they're not like quite there. Right. And what I enjoyed about the restaurant sequence and sort of like what it gets at towards the end of the film is how so much of culture relies on like the people, right? And how like this restaurant was like, oh, it is professional. This is a perfect restaurant, except we can't hide all the mistakes, right? And then it didn't matter, right? It didn't matter that the restaurant was a total mess, because tons of people came and tons of people had a good time, right? And and then there's like this celebration as people walk out and the sun is rising after a wild night, right? Of like, Paris is still Paris, like no matter what you do, right? Like no matter how corporate it gets, right? The culture is going to stay there, And I think that's a positive thing to kind of be joyful about, because if you are someone who's really like rubbing your brow and looking at that corporate imagery and depressing grayness at the beginning and being like, yeah, it was so much better back in the day, right? It's almost like he flips that on its head and says like, yeah, but there's actually like still people out there, like there's still people out there and there's still life out there, right? And I like, so that was like my big takeaway from it. And I was like, well, I don't live in Paris, right? But I do like people, like that's kind of like where I was standing. And I guess that's maybe immature of me, but
in some ways you can kind of feel that in your own life, you can kind of feel that, maybe, things were less complicated when you were younger, or things, things have changed in a way that make you uncomfortable. Yeah, but I think you're totally right. I think it does have a very positive message, one that's very sincere in a lot of ways, like Hulot's character, who is a very unassuming but sincere person. He, even in the sort of apartment sequence that you didn't like, he kind of bumps into his old friend and he's like, oh yeah, I'll come and sit in for a drink or whatever, like I'll come and spend time with you. And yeah, so like I think you're right. There's like a very intriguing message in the movie, I guess. There's like something that you can take away from it, that I think is more hopeful than you get from from a lot of movies. More hopeful than most movies you come out of.
Yeah, and definitely less cynical than maybe most, well, of the few French films I've seen. Like, there is usually a lot of almost like satire or like dark commentary on what's happening. And I think there's a small touch of that at the beginning, right? But at least it's beautiful, right? Like some of the it reminds me of those like cookie cutter corporate business images in like a textbook or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Because like just the way that the building and the I don't know, like just a lot of it can be stunning, and there are a lot of scenes that just kind of I'm just, they're like engraved in my head now, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's like this one with these, it's like you're seeing the bottom of skyscrapers, and I think they're getting off the bus or a bus is rolling away, and there's like these glass squares, and you can kind of see like corporate people in the glass squares. And I don't remember exactly the moment, or like the scene where the guy is walking down the hallway forever, and the guy was like, "Oh, I'll introduce you," right? But the hallway is just so long, right? So, yeah, I think it's got some really sweet art direction. And I think, like, if you aren't, like, I mean, I'm a casual, right? If you don't go in stupid, right? If you go in, like, ready for this experience, I do not think you'll be disappointed. It's a fun movie. I think it's approachable if you know what you're getting into. I specifically don't know what I'm getting into on the show, right? And it was still expertly put together in a way that drew me in. It was just halfway through the movie, right? Like that's what sucks for me, right? It was halfway through the film that, which, is more pleasant than not ever being drawn in at all, right? So
true.
That's I'll take it. I was like, okay, like at least there's redeeming qualities and a very hopeful message at the end.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, well, I do want to mention one other sequence that I just love and is so funny to me, which is the scene where he's kind of wandering through the store, that is like, or it's like I don't even know what it was. It was like a business showcase or whatever.
Yeah, it was like a showroom for products.
Yeah, and he's kind of like bumbling through this showroom that have just like the most random items, and he bumps into the guy who's who slams, like the gag is that when he closes the door, there's no sound. And this is very like classic Tati. Like this is his shtick is like sound effects, pretty much like absurd or weird sound effects. Like the chair, like the squeezing of the chair, where he goes, and right. Every time he sits on the chair.
Yeah, I listened to this film with actually these like studio headphones because I think you told me to watch it with good audio.
Yeah,
and it was the best that I had available, so I just ended up listening to it with this. And yeah, there's some neat sound in there. I think it's an older movie, so maybe like the audio quality isn't like to like comparable to the levels that we hear today, like with 3D audio and all that stuff. But it's still like neat, I guess.
Yeah,
well, and casual, but
the reason why I said listen with good sound is like he spent a lot of time working on these sound effects. Like the way that it was filmed, basically everything had to be overdubbed. Like literally everything in the movie, every sound effect, every piece of dialogue, footstep, everything was created after the filming of the movie.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because you're watching people's mouths and they're not. I was like, is this translated? Like, I was just confused. But then there's like French in it, so I'm like, what?
Yeah, and not everything lines up. It's hard with dialogue, obviously. But with the sound effects, I think he just does like a spectacular job of like evoking a soundscape that is so like deep, but also very quirky, and a little bit, funny at times. Well, and what I was saying with the door was, the gag is that it's a door that won't slam. It doesn't make any noise when it slams, and so the salesperson gets really mad at Hulot, and he walks to the other side and he tries to slam the door, and obviously, nothing, no sound comes out of it, and it's just like those kinds of gags are like really funny to me. Like in some ways, I find it similar to how I don't know, there's a different kind of comedy, I guess, or this kind of comedy is very different from the one that we get in today's day and age, I guess, like the blockbuster comedy. It's very involved in the filmmaking aspect of it, right? The comedy is made through the picture and through the sound. It's not made from there's basically no dialogue in this entire movie, or nothing of importance, I would say. There's very little that you have to hear in terms of what the people are saying. Although there is lots that you have to hear in order to understand the joke, right? And so like that is what's most interesting to me. I find, I don't know, I guess I wouldn't want to compare this movie to like someone like Edgar Wright, but I think he sort of, he's taken on the torch of that kind of filmmaking, basically like where no one else has. He makes movies that are comedy movies, whereas like other directors will make like, stand up that happen to be filmed, and is like,
right.
is like, oh, it's a goofy premise and a couple of comedians. Well, let's make a movie, like, and there's very little done with the, the actual filmmaking element of it. There's very little that couldn't have just been done in like a sketch or on a sitcom, basically. You know what I mean? Does that make sense, I guess?
No, yeah, I know what you're saying. It's not just situational commentary, right? It's more of there's like this it's not slapstick, but it's like mellow slapstick,
Yeah, it is in some ways, but also it's like it's not slapstick in the way that like
the reason I said slapstick, and I'm forgive me if I don't know the exact definition, but there's a physical element, right? Like there's something that is not just being said, but is also being viewed. So, and there's action around it. I mean, the door shutting, the door opening with the glass door that's broken, right? Like stuff like that. Or, and then there's moments where they do pick up the drunks like by their pants and throw them out, right? Like that's
when
a little...
when he flips the stool over and he puts him in like the garbage can. It's so funny.
Yeah. So like it's a interesting combination. I think comparing it to Edgar Wright is a modern, like a very modern and evolved representation of what this film's comedy is. And I would say it even leans more towards Edgar Wright's like Hot Fuzz, not like Baby Driver. You know what I mean? Like not in that same vein, but there, like I could see like the scene where I mean, I love Hot Fuzz. There's that moment where he like jumps down and says like, "Oh, mothers," and then it's just a bunch of mothers, you know? Like,
Yeah.
it's moments like that that would like, oh, that could totally fit into like what this movie does comedically.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and that's what I mean. Is like I think people like Edgar Wright have kind of grown up, I guess, a little bit on this. You mentioned Pink Panther. I think Hulot is actually an inspiration for the character of the Pink Panther.
Oh yeah, I can see that definitely.
But even with the hat and the and the coat and whatever, just visually is a little bit of an inspiration. But yeah, I mean, I think it's different because in some ways, I guess, comedy kind of evolves, and I think this movie is not like laugh out loud, or well, in some places it is kind of laugh out loud, just the absurdity of certain moments. But in other places, I think this honestly, I think some of this movie is very sincere, which doesn't give you a lot of good comedy necessarily, and so like those elements, I would say, aren't that funny, but they are very well done. They're very well made. And so to me, I really enjoy this movie because everything is so well put together. It's all so cohesive and sort of, it's like lovingly crafted. Like I imagine Tati like knitting this movie from from yarn and putting everything just lovingly together in this own little mesh. You know what I mean? Like people have said about this movie that it's kind of the ultimate expression of the auteur, the ultimate expression of the director in charge of his work. Right. And I think that probably is true, or at least this is a great example of an auteur at work. Obviously, he's, in some ways you kind of have to be a visionary in order to make something like this. You have to be, and not even just the filmmaking element of it, but the risk element of it too. Like this is a weird, risky movie to make. You know what I mean? It's shot on 70 millimeter, super expensive to make, really time consuming, put a lot of time into editing and everything else. And it pretty much bombed in the box office. It really didn't do well and kind of cost him financially. He only made one other movie after this. And so I don't know. To me, this is kind of a really great example of auteur theory at work, of a director being solely in charge of his craft in a way. So.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't have the sort of the background or knowledge of talking about this director at all, but I can tell how much, like, it's weird because we're talking about this film and I can't stop thinking about that weird coffee shop that he like stops in after the restaurant. And I was like, there's literally nothing special about that coffee shop. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But for some reason, it feels real, Mm-hmm. For some reason, it seems like I could have walked in there, And I don't know a lot of movies that are able to jump from so many different palettes in setting, right? Because there's like that corporate, disconnected beginning, and then there's the restaurant that's falling apart, and it's unlike anything you've ever seen. And then suddenly he puts you in a place that you're like, I feel like I've walked into this place before. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's definitely a craftsmanship to it. Did the craftsmanship save me from boredom at the beginning? No, but it also shined like in the restaurant scene, right? The restaurant scene is what you got. You got to see this movie for that. So, Cameron, do you have any other background stuff you want to talk about with this film at all around, like, because you mentioned something about the making of, I know you mentioned audio things, 70 millimeter. As a casual, I don't know what you mean by 70 millimeter. If you want to kind of expand on that, because I don't know why that'd be expensive compared to something else.
Yeah. So, normally when you shoot a film, even today, if you shoot a film, it's going to be on 35 millimeter film stock. So you could either actually a good example of the opposite of this is in for some reason I'm forgetting the first movie that we ever watched in this show, Breathless. So Breathless was shot on 16 millimeter film. So it's much smaller, much grainier, less detail, less quality, basically. So imagine like, you're shooting on, I don't know, there's not a good example. It's just a smaller film stock, basically. But this movie was shot on not 35 millimeter film, which is like the standard, and you can reprint that in 4K quality, and it's like perfect, crystal clear, blah, blah, blah. Really high quality stuff.
Does, what about like Hateful Eight was shot on?
Hateful Eight was shot on 70 millimeter, which is like the next step up. So it's like double it's not really resolution technically, but it's basically double the resolution of 35 millimeter.
But there's also other factors. I mean, because I've like worked with cameras, right? There's dynamic range and all, like just the level of detail with it. So
yeah. So it's like the better premium quality film stock, essentially. And it was rare to do that. It was not very. It was kind of uncommon, except for in like really huge budget, basically like biblical epics, like. There was a couple examples throughout history. We don't have to get bogged down on it, but so 70 millimeter is like it's kind of a really high quality film stock, and then there's like IMAX is like the biggest, the most insane quality, the biggest film. So
is IMAX like? There's like a physical film to it. I don't know why we're going down this rabbit hole, but I'm kind of curious at this point.
IMAX is technically a physical film. And actually, it's funny because like the digital version of IMAX is sometimes called Limax, which is like, it's not actually the film. And it's not always. So it's like, there's the digital version, which is actually IMAX resolution, and then there's the digital version, which they say is IMAX but actually isn't. It's like a lower quality resolution. But if you go to like the Tech Museum shows you IMAX in IMAX film, like projected in like the film stock. So that's basically the only place in the area that you can see that in.
The Tech Museum's in San Jose, if you're curious.
Yes. Yeah, so
we're from the Bay, so we don't really know any other places you can see real IMAX in.
There's like very few. It's really rare. Like the digital IMAX version, that's like the premium quality one. That's usually what you'll get.
What's like some famous staples for like? I know this is ridiculous, but like 70 millimeter. We mentioned Tarantino. Is there an IMAX film on film that like most people have seen? Like what? Lord of the Rings or something? Or?
An IMAX film, basically no film has been shot exclusively on IMAX. The closest that you would get is Interstellar. I think was shot like, it was like 60% on IMAX or something.
Wow.
Like basically no film has ever been shot like solely on IMAX, except for documentaries. Actually, they're the only ones that have been able to do that. But that's because like it's really expensive. Like it's stupidly expensive.
That's why the Tech Museum only plays like Marching with the Penguins or whatever.
Yeah, pretty much.
IMAX, yeah.
Pretty much. Ben-Hur is another great example, just historically, of a huge 70 millimeter epic that was shot on 70 millimeter.
Come on, even I have seen Ben-Hur, and I'm a casual.
You have? I actually haven't, because it's 3.5
serious?
hours and I don't want to.
Dude, it's actually like pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah,
right.
I enjoyed it. I remember I watched it even when I was a hyper kid, and I didn't even like have an attention span of a pea, and I remember liking it. So
that's cool. I mean, honestly, maybe I will then if you say it's good, because I've just never been all that interested.
I gotta be real with you. I don't remember barely anything about it, but I would be willing to do a commentary track with you. I think that'd be really fun to watch it.
That would be cool. That would be a good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to do that maybe upstairs in the big, in the den with the big TV.
Oh yeah.
Because that's one. Another reason why I haven't seen it is because I've always kind of been like, that's one I should see in theaters, or one I should see like blown up. In a big format. But
I got to be honest with you, Cameron. Theaters are basically crashing, so we might as well just like shout out to them and say, "Hey, we'll rent the theater and we'll do the podcast live in there."
Yeah, maybe. I mean,
I hear
honestly,
that the mall theater by my house, you can rent like an entire auditorium for $200. That's how desperate they are.
That was the case with the AMC near, like in Daly City. You know that one?
Yeah.
We were. No, I think Juzo did. He rented out a screen for 10.
That's ridiculous.
And I think it's not that expensive. It's like it's really not.
Those poor guys.
Yeah, but
well, anyways, let's jump back to Playtime. Sorry, I wanted to go down the just because I'm uneducated about like film stock and things like that. But.
No, it's okay. Yeah. So I mean, I don't really have too much more to say. There's, it was shot in a way that made it really expensive to shoot. There's not like a ton of information. It's usually probably all in French, honestly. So I don't have like a ton. The other thing I guess about the production is like he built pretty much to scale models of a lot of these things. So, the big rooms and the big room with a cubicle and blah, blah, blah. All of they called it, I think they called it Tati Land. And that was like the big giant set, essentially. And that's pretty cool. I mean, like that's another example of him being like an auteur in that way. Also, if you'll notice, there are like 0 close-ups in this film. It's all shot on wides. Part of the reason was because of that too, is because he had these like giant sets. It's funny because that reminded me when I was reading that reminded me of, remember Les Mis, how they like built all those giant sets. Did you ever see Les Mis?
No, I refuse to watch musicals. So.
Okay, well, in any case, they built these like giant, massive sets, and then they spent the entire time just like really glued on people's faces, and it was kind of ugly in that way. So,
well, I got to be honest with you, Cameron, and I'm sorry to go back to camera talk with Cameron and Isaac. I am like unapologetically against wide shots, and it's really because I think a lot of people don't know how to do them, and because they just lack focus. I know that's like so pretentious of me, especially as a casual, but I do some video work, and most of my frustration with some of the footage I get from people who are holding the camera that aren't me is the fact that they're shooting way too wide and they have no idea how to structure anything. So I'm just kind of like, come on, man, just zoom that thing in. It's not like the set, quote, quote, looks that good, but
yeah, well, I think that's true in some ways, although oppositely, a wide shot can also be an example of sort of technical mastery in a way.
100%. And I think this movie understands that even if it's wide, it's still designed with composure. And I think that's the beauty of the corporate scenes at the beginning, is because there's so little on screen that looks different, that the framing, even though it's wide, can really make a statement in the cinematography. So, I mean, props to it. I didn't even notice that there weren't any close-ups, so I just feel like a hypocrite with my hatred for wide shots. But I can't stand them sometimes. I'm obviously like cinema and movies, like they know what they're doing, but
yeah, no. I think it's actually a good thing to point out, is like some people just can't, like, wide shots are really boring sometimes if you don't know how to stage things right. And actually, I think that's the most important thing about wide shots is staging. Like, it's really, really important that everybody is kind of where they're supposed to be, I guess. Like, every character, there's a direction that your eye goes to in a frame. And actually, Tati is like really, really good in this movie. He's amazing at not always doing visual cues for that and doing like sound cues and color cues as well, of drawing your eye into a part of the frame where maybe there's like a bunch of, giant, there's cacophony going on around you, and then you focus in on the back of people's shirts because they have like the crown, the paint on them,
right?
Or something like that.
I do think that it was difficult to really lock on to what I was supposed to see in moments, especially in the chaos of the restaurant.
Yeah.
But it was so fun that I didn't really care at that point. His mastery of composition earlier in the film, when there's less chaos, is much more like pinpoint. And if you are like someone who loves wide shots, I got a bone to pick, because just think about this, like just think about how unskilled some movie makers are. Like when you consider like just a helicopter shot, just think about a helicopter shot for a second. It never stays on screen then longer than like 5 seconds. And it's because there's no composition. It's just an expensive shot. Like I was talking to someone who had worked in Hollywood film for a long time when I was down visiting there. It was like a connection of my girlfriend's dad, and he was telling me like the pricing of to just use like 10 seconds of helicopter footage in LA. Like he was like, it was just insane. And to think like these guys go up there, they spend so much money only to use 10 seconds of a shot that isn't even like composed, right? They're just like, we just got to get through it because first of all, we can't afford it. Second of all, like it's boring, like it's boring if it's not put together, right? Like, it's just, I'm sorry if I've unlocked your vision towards this. I'm sorry if I've ruined wide shots for you, but it's just been really dragging on me lately. And it's also surprisingly funny that I didn't notice them in this film, how there's no close-ups.
Yeah, well, it's really funny, actually, that you mentioned that, because I went back and watched a really interesting video essay about Edgar Wright, and one of the points that he made was the same point that you made. You've watched Every Frame of Painting, right?
A little bit
know
of
that
it.
guy? Yeah.
Just
so
a little.
he did a video essay about Edgar Wright, and he was saying like, okay, what is a way that you could show someone going from one city to another city? You could do it the boring Hollywood way, where, you have an expensive helicopter shot of, a car going over a bridge and look at a couple landmarks. Hey, now you're in a new city. Or you could do the Edgar Wright way. And he brings up the scene in Hot Fuzz where he's sitting on the train, or he gets a taxi, and then he's sitting and waiting next to the train.
You can't even describe
and blah, blah, blah.
it, dude. That scene is like literally one of the most inspiring pieces of cinema I've ever seen. I'm not even kidding. Like
it's amazing.
That scene is like, not only is it ADHD, which I appreciate, right? But it is so effective at what it's trying to do, which tells you this guy moved from point A to point B. That's all it tells you, but it does it in such an entertaining way.
Not just moved, he moved to a place that is civilization. He moved from London out into the sticks, basically.
The little cell phone
exactly.
symbol things. Yeah, there's so much told in that short period, and it's engaging, it's informative, and it's driving. Like, it's really, really pushing stuff forward. We're talking about Hot Fuzz a lot in this review.
Well, I think in some ways it's a really good example. I guess it's a good way to bring. It's a good modern example of sort of something that this film does as well, to a different degree, visually explaining, or not explaining, but just visually showing things and letting the audience sort of understand and come to their own conclusions about things. I think this movie does it really perfectly. I don't know. Do you want to get into your shot of the film?
Let's see. Shot of the film. This is a difficult, like, I can't really think of what the shot of the film is besides that one moment with like I don't know if it's buses passing, but they just show there's some great scenes of like the corners of skyscrapers and big glass like windows, and it's sort of showing you that corporate style. Or there's a moment with all these like black and gray cars, you know, on the street. I maybe it's the wide thing, dude. I'm sorry to keep going on that tangent, but yeah, I couldn't point out a moment that I was like, this is my shot of the film. Yeah.
Yeah, my shot is, I mentioned it a bit earlier, but it's basically every time, you know, we're following the American tourist, and she opens a door, and it reflects a landmark of Paris. I really loved those shots. They're so somber, and they tell so much with so little. You know, it's just framing and composition, and it tells you exactly what that means. It tells you exactly what the emotion is that you're supposed to feel. It's so perfect. It's so beautiful. So
maybe
those are my shots of the film.
Yeah, maybe it's the composure of like, or maybe it's the use of miniatures, but there are a lot of shots like from up above, like the cubicle scene that just stays stagnant, and you watch people run through almost like an IKEA looking maze.
Yeah.
Right. I don't enjoy those scenes, but I can say that the shot is nice. You know, like I guess that's another one to point out. I don't know. I honestly, when you asked me that question, I was like, I don't have one.
What about the shot of after as the sun is rising, where you see the one glass panel that's supposed to be the door, and it's a shot out at the beautiful sun rising on the buildings. You remember that shot? And they're all walking out of the restaurant.
Yeah, I remember it. I don't know. Yeah, it's good. It's good. There's a lot of good stuff in this movie. There is. So nothing really stuck with me where I was like, I need to shout that out. So
yeah.
Cameron, let's get into the ratings. We rate on a scale of, for everyone, for casuals, for the curious, and for the cinephiles. I'm going to place this one for the curious because if you are interested in something like this, you can seek it out and not be disappointed. I don't know if I would say it's really for casual people getting through, the cinematic library or whatever we call it. And I definitely wouldn't say this movie is for everyone, but that's just kind of how I stand, because I don't think it's a bad movie. I do believe it's approachable with a little bit of context. I don't know if I am comfortable putting it in for the casuals. When I think of casuals, I'm thinking of people that are like, I like Christopher Nolan, and I realize like his movies are good. Whereas everyone was like, I don't know what I like. I just go to the movies, right? So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm landing with it. How about you, Cameron?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe it's not for all casuals, but I think this movie is very approachable. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I can see how you'd argue for that.
It is a sweet movie. It's very sincere. It's a movie that doesn't take a lot of, you don't have to be, I don't want to say too engaged, but you don't have to be sort of, analyzing every little bit to get something out of it. And so I don't know. I could see it could be for the casuals. That's where I'll put it. It's a movie that has a little bit of humor and levity, and is kind of hopeful and nice. And so like in that way, I think people will enjoy it, even if it's not like everybody's cup of tea. I think if you're looking for something that is kind of pleasant and sweet and just approachable in some ways, this is a good movie to just put on, So.
Yeah, I can see how you're coming to that conclusion. This is so random, but I had this dream about McDonald's like a day before I watched this movie. And I was like genuinely struggling with its DoorDash order, because obviously McDonald's is not good for me, right? And I have not relapsed in a while. I had like this crazy heartburn experience. But I do remember when I was watching this film, like I filled up a DoorDash order like 2 times and then deleted it 2 times. That was at the beginning. I was like, this is kind of boring. Should I get McDonald's? Should I do it? And so, yeah, I mean, you could turn it on and not be completely engaged, still get it all there. But yeah, I don't know why I really felt the need to confess that. I just, maybe I'm just patting myself on the back because I never ordered it. So no relapse yet. Whatever.
Right.
Cameron's like, I'm disgusted by you. I don't even
No,
like McDonald's.
I mean, yeah, McDonald's is kind of icky, but also
I don't know what to tell you, dude. It's more of a nostalgia thing. I can't.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm not begrudging or anything. I love In-N-Out, so it is what it is.
The problem is, I think I just love fast food. I think that's really my problem, just all around.
Yeah.
So, and there's something about those fries, dude. There's enough said about those McDonald's fries, but man, there is something. Nicotine or some wild drug. I have no idea. All right. Well, yeah, I think we've said enough. Playtime, check it out. It's on the Criterion collection, right?
The Criterion Channel. Yep.
Channel. That was the issue. I was trying to sign into the Criterion collection.
Right.
Apparently there's two. Yeah, so the Criterion Channel. That's how you do it. You can watch it there. 2 hours. It's 2 hours long. That's it's pretty long.
That's not that long. That's
long. It's long.
You were like, oh, I was a baby and I watched Ben-Hur. That's like 4 hours long.
Well, yeah, maybe I'll regret referring to Ben-Hur at all. I mean, I don't even remember it. So.
Ben-Hur is like 3.5 hours long. So
as long as it's not Gone with the Wind again. Man,
yeah.
Gone with the Wind was slow.
That was a rough one.
Slow.
It was hard.
It's slow and it's about a hoe. That's what I'll say. So, yeah, super slow. Anyways, yeah, we're here every Monday. We post on Monday. Again, give us a rating on iTunes. Check out our Patreon, patreon.com/ECFS Productions. We appreciate you all. Shout out to our Patreon. Shout out to our executive producer, Darren O'Neill. Thank you for supporting the show, and we will be back next Monday. Cinema Spectator is an ECFS Productions podcast executive produced by Darren O'Neill. If you want your name read in the credits of the show, you can check us out at patreon.com/ECFS Productions to achieve this status. Thank you, Darren, for the support, and for the rest of you, we appreciate your support as well. Have a good one.